The Asbestos Strike, the spark for nationalism and reform in Quebec. There's a long history of the English versus the French, and that certainly corresponds to right into Canada as well. Certainly at whenever the English had control of Canada in the Treaty of Paris in 1763. And the English, ever since then, have been trying to decrease the French language, the French culture and Catholicism into Canada. And by doing so, they set out laws, and they only allow jobs, and you have to speak English. And there's just many opportunities for the French to really thrive in Canada, even though they have been here way longer than the English. But there has been a moment in the Great Darkness period of the Asbestos Strike of 1949 to spark a new identity of the French Canadians. In the Great Darkness period, there is the Asbestos Strike of 1949, and there was 3,500 French Canadians, mining workers, that wanted to improve their personal protective equipment and wanted better wages and wanted really just a safer work environment, as many people tended to get cancer from working into these mines. And it obviously did not turn out well. Police got involved. Even the Catholic Church was against the French Canadians. Even their own premier, Maurice Duplessis, he was even against the miners' strike and forced them to go back. And this involved into a 18-week strike, and a lot of people were beaten but not killed. So my thesis is, after World War II, the Anglo-Canadian federal and provincial authority in Quebec and American corporations dominated key industries, exploiting Quebec's natural resources, using the French Canadians as cheap labor for dangerous jobs as they face economic and social oppression as the majority. Meanwhile, Anglo-Canadian pressures to assimilate French cultural and political marginalization, while wages stagnated and working conditions degraded. These struggles sparked the Asbestos Strike of 1949, the first large-scale protest in rural Quebec that united nationalism among French Canadians. This event set the stage for the French-Canadian Quiet Revolution to be politically involved to start a separatist movement from the capitalist American industries and the Anglo-Canadian Provincial Federal Authority. Another book would be A People's History of Quebec, and it was written by Jacques Lecousset and Robin Philpott, and they have more of a modern view of the strike than Pierre Baillet. They're stating that the strikers weren't just benefiting for themselves, they're benefiting for all French Canadians. They striked for the future of Catholic Quebecois children to have a better working life. And they argue that they saw it as a moral and social justice issue against English Canada. They argue that the workers had a lot of support based on Catholic social teachings. And it would make sense because they're part of a union, part of the Confédération des Travailleurs Catholiques du Canada, which is a working Catholic confederation in Canada. And they also argue another thing, that it wasn't just for French Canadian nationalism, it was for a French Catholic Quebecois nationalism instead. Fred Kaufman, the last author that we'll mention in the historiography part, Kaufman believed that the miners' demands were largely unmet, and this, for the premier Maurice Duplessis, almost like a governor we think of, since he didn't meet those demands for the miners, his corruption of his provincial power started to show. And this really got young and old French Canadians to be passionately involved into a new generation of leadership and labor movements and politics, that they wanted a new government that was virtuous and fair to the French Canadian people. Now, Fred Kaufman, he was a journalist, and he was actually there at the strike. Not at the beginning, but he did witness the political uprising and the fight against the federal authority or provincial authority to fight back against their own rights. And this was certainly the spark of the revolution that Fred Kaufman got to witness. And him working at the press certainly helped to promote this image even more. this message of the French Canadians to go through this decolonization, to have their own nation, to have independence. Over time, the Asbestos Strike has been interpreted not only as a labor dispute, but as a part of French Quebec's nationalism to boil against their English colonizers. The Quiet Revolution certainly could not have been as impactful if it wasn't for the Asbestos Strike. The strike certainly had a large connection to all of French Quebec to decolonize and have a more modern shift towards secularism, economic modernization, and a separatism or maybe an independence from English Canada.